continuation of last week's program. We had a great time with our guests, and I learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to today. Our guest is Johnny Morris, Vietnam-era naval aviator. Welcome back, Johnny.
Well, thank you, Rick, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate Rick inviting me to return. As I mentioned at the end of our program last week, I had been ordered from the USS Forrestal due to the fire event over to the United States America aircraft carrier, and the name again, USS America. And we were ordered to Vietnam to begin combat operations early in 1968. Leaving Norfolk, Virginia took 3 weeks for the USS America to steam from the Naval Air Station to our assigned position, referred to in Vietnam, Yankee Station. You've probably heard that over the years, which was in the Gulf of Tonkin, which is the ocean that flanked the North Vietnam shore. I immediately began flying day and night combat missions as assigned by the Combat Control Center officer. The combat mission included a catapult launch from the aircraft carrier at 200 miles an hour, climb and locate the airborne tanker aircraft that was located about 150 miles from the carrier, conduct airborne refueling, and then cross into the shoreline and proceed to our mission area in North Vietnam. Ladies and gentlemen, my Phantom had a fuel load of 2,000 gallons. When we launched and we were full of 17,000 pounds of bombs, we were burning approximately 1,000 gallons of fuel each Phantom aircraft as we climbed up, and that is the reason we had to take on fuel from an airborne aircraft. And I'm sure you may have seen pictures of that on TV, of an airplane refueling from a tanker. That was our job. And then we would leave that and we would move on into North Vietnam to our assigned target areas, which were usually 30 to 50 miles inland and 150 miles north of the DMZ, known as the Demilitarized Zone. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that meant there were no friendly people on the ground in the area that we were assigned to fly our missions. We were aware if our aircraft were to be shot down by either an enemy fighter aircraft or from the intense enemy ground fire weapons that were shooting at us, including SAMs, surface-to-air missiles that were radar guided, if that missile hit or exploded nearby and struck our aircraft, we would possibly have to eject from our crippled airplane at 500 miles an hour, hopefully live, and come down by parachute in the ocean so the fleet rescue helicopters could pick us up and fly us back to our aircraft carrier in order to fly another mission the next day. Our alternative was to parachute down to the ground in North Vietnam, remember, where there were no friendly forces, and we would immediately suffer the experience of enemy capture and very long-term imprisonment. My F-4 Phantom aircraft cruising speed was 600 miles an hour. We couldn't fly any faster when we were carrying bombs because it would literally take the wings off. The top speed, if we had no bombs and we were referred to as clean underneath the wings, was 1,400 miles an hour, and that was in full afterburner. The aircraft had 2,000 gallons of jet fuel and carried a 17,000-pound bomb load. Ladies and gentlemen, that was a greater load than a World War II B-29 bomber aircraft. And in addition to the bombs, we were carrying 8 air-to-air missiles that were radar controlled by the radar control officer who sat in my F-4 aircraft directly behind me. Our mission was to fly in advance of the A-6 Intruder and A-7 bomber aircraft and to draw and identify enemy ground fire that was located around or near the target area. Yes, we were the ones that went in and said, "Hello, enemy, here we are," to get them to fire at us. Upon receiving fire from the enemy ground gunners, we would roll into a 50-degree dive angle, flying at 600 miles an hour from 13,000 feet. The bomb dive would take about 6 seconds. Therefore, the radar intercept officer in the rear seat would literally watch the altimeter, call off the altitude as we dive down, and at 6,000 feet would loudly say the words, "Pickle pull," in the mic. That was my clue to push the button that would release all of our bombs and pull the aircraft back up in a vertical climb and advance both engines to full afterburner. Executing that maneuver is where most of our F-4 Phantoms were hit by ground fire, because when they were pulling out from the dive down low to the ground, the aircraft belly was exposed. If the aircraft were hit and damaged, that would cripple their aircraft, and the naval aviators would either fly out of the mission area to the safety of the ocean or, no choice, eject and parachute to the ground, depending on the conditions and their required quick reactions. Ladies and gentlemen, this had to be created in 6 split seconds. If our aircraft was not hit by enemy fire, we would then climb, and we took on our second mission, which to circle the target area at 13,000 feet above the bomber aircraft that were then engaged in diving and delivering their ordnance. Our job as fighter pilots was to scan the skies with our aircraft radar and physically eyeball search the area for enemy aircraft that may have been launched from their air base in North Vietnam. If we located an enemy aircraft according to the United States rules of engagement, we were required to immediately radio communicate to our combat control center officer on the aircraft carrier of the threat before we were given the order to actually fire a missile at an oncoming aircraft or to egress from the area. If the order to engage with the enemy, then our job immediately came one-on-one with the enemy pilot to shoot him down with one of our missiles, and he would also attempt to shoot us down. On another mission, I would occasionally fly as an escort for an SR-70 Blackbird spy aircraft that would pass over our area en route to Russia or China. I also flew with the United States Navy spy aircraft called the A-5 Vigilante that would take pictures of our target areas and the post-target areas. As I mentioned earlier, we knew the Russian pilots were flying the Russian-made aircraft. There were very few Vietnam pilots that were trained to fly the Russian fighter aircraft. If I survived bombing missions and possible attack by an enemy aircraft, I would egress to the coastline, meet that airborne tanker again to take on enough fuel to return to the carrier, and upon returning to the carrier, I would enter the landing pattern, make an approach. My aircraft approach speed was about 200 miles an hour, and when we landed, the tail hook would grab a wire that was located about 6 inches above the deck that would stop the aircraft in less than 200 feet.
One question,
Yes, sir.
and we'll get to that question right after this commercial break. That's interesting. Thanks for listening, folks. Welcome back, folks. Johnny, right before the break, you were talking about landing on a plane, but the better conversation is always off air. Can you talk about the physicality of taking off a carrier and landing? That, woof.
Yes, I'll be glad to talk about it. Those naval aviators that are listening out here are probably giggling as we talk today because they remember those times. The catapult was 200 feet long on the nose of the ship. The aircraft would be hooked, we call it hooked to the catapult, and in less than 2.5 to 3 seconds, the aircraft would literally be moving from 0 to 200 miles an hour as it went off the end of the aircraft carrier and was only 80 feet from the ocean water at that moment and was flying at about 10% above its stall speed. And you have to get the landing gear up, get the flaps up, and get the airplane out of the way of the other aircraft that's getting ready to be launched behind you. It takes quick thinking and obviously quite a bit of ambidextrity on your part. The physicality of it is you're sitting there dead still, and in less than 3 seconds, your body is experiencing between 8 and 9 Gs pushed back in the seat of the aircraft. Your eyeballs literally cage. Your hands have a problem reaching for the stick and the control for the landing gear because you're pushed back so far in the seat. So you have to steel yourself to push and move forward as you launch off the aircraft carrier in order to get the airplane in the air and bring the landing gear up. Subsequently, coming back for a landing, you're much lighter, of course. Our landing weight on the Phantom was not to exceed 38,000 pounds. Our takeoff weight not to exceed 54,000 round numbers. So you can see that landing we had to be much lighter, so we would lighten up due to the ordnance, lighten up due to fuel usage. Coming around, we would bring the aircraft back to about 200 miles an hour, and I say about because it would depend on your fuel weight. Landing gear would be down, flaps would be down. You would circle around behind the aircraft carrier at approximately 3 to 4 miles, and you would utilize the visual landing system referred to as the mirror. You may have seen that on TV. It's a light on the left side of the aircraft carrier deck that the pilot utilizes to guide himself down to the deck. So that would help us get on the glide slope, we called it. And as the aircraft approached the deck, you would have to usually apply a little more power because the inertia from the ship would literally pull the aircraft down. It would begin to pull it down slightly. We'd have to give it a slight amount more power. And then the pilot's job was to maneuver that airplane so that the tail hook, which was 64 feet behind the pilot, located in the tail at the bottom of the aircraft, and then it would extend down another 8 feet, and it had a hook that looked kind of like a horseshoe on the bottom of it, and it would have to hook up with a wire that was less than a foot from the carrier deck, and that would immediately bring the airplane to a very screeching halt in about 2 to 3 seconds from 200 miles an hour to dead still. You could not utilize your brakes because it would blow the tires out. When the hook engaged, the pilot was forced forward, literally almost into the instrument panel because of the G-force inertias that then were reversed. And at that point then, you had to immediately taxi out of the landing zone to clear for another airplane that was about to land.
And I take it you did that. Let's make it a little more challenging. Night.
Oh my, yes. At nighttime, you did the same thing. There was no help other than what I just mentioned as far as the equipment on the aircraft carrier, and we'll even make it more exciting. How about at night in bad weather when it's raining and you can't even see outside of your cockpit? Then, yes, the aircraft carrier would have radar controllers on it, just like in a civilian air tower or airport tower, and they would literally guide you down blind so that your airplane was guided by them, by radar, and it would hit the carrier deck, and you would never see it until you physically hit the deck. There, by the way, there were no lights on the aircraft carrier. It was just a big black hulk out
Sure.
in the ocean.
Sure.
And that was, of course, due to enemy action.
Right. That's that's a little scary there. That's a little scary there. Tell me a little more about your action when you were there.
Okay. I'm going to move along now to share a brief story in honor of the selfless duty performed by naval aviators who were ordered to fly into harm's way in enemy territory, all weather, day and night, to rescue those naval aviators whose aircraft had been shot down by enemy ground forces, and they were forced to parachute out of their aircraft and land on the ground or in the ocean that were controlled by enemy forces. I'm proud to share with you a Congressional Medal of Honor recipient, Navy Lieutenant Clyde Lassen, who with his helicopter crew saved the lives of two of my naval aviator fellow pilots, that were flying off the USS America, into enemy territory and were shot down at night by an enemy surface-to-air missile over a target area about 30 miles inland from the shore in North Vietnam, very close to Thanh Hoa Bridge and almost to the North Vietnam capital. I personally was assigned to duty in the aircraft tower of my squadron. Aviators that were not in flight duty had additional duties. My duty that evening was to be the liaison in the tower of the aircraft carrier, and it was to be with the air boss that directed all directions of the aircraft carrier and our squadrons. I also had direct contact with our commanding officer in the event of any emergency. I personally witnessed in real time the actual radio communications between all of the air crews involved in this rescue mission as soon as Lieutenant Holtzcall spoke the words Mayday. These F-4s would fly in close support in order to try to protect the helicopter that Lieutenant Lassen was flying. Lieutenant Lassen received the Medal of Honor. It is the highest medal that can be earned by any military member in the United States. His courageous and daring actions, determination, and extraordinary airmanship in the face of great risk sustain and enhance the finest traditions of the United States Naval Service.
Johnny, I know at some point you were shot down. I think we're getting close to a minute left. Can you tell me about, less than a minute, can you briefly tell me about that?
Yes, on one of the missions, Wild Child was shot down by a SAM missile. We were fortunate enough, however, that we were very close to the ocean, and as we ejected from our aircraft, we floated down literally in the ocean and were picked up by our friendly helicopter forces and returned.
Very good. Johnny, I sure appreciate you coming the last 2 weeks and sharing. Folks, another reason, if you don't attend Movers and Shakers on Fridays, you may want to. We have great speakers each and every week, just like Johnny. Johnny, I hope people better understand from today's program why, when they see someone that has served, they need to say thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening, folks.